Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with John David Mann and Dan Rockwell. And they're here to share with us their new book, The Vagrant, The Inner Journey of Leadership, a Parable. So have you ever wondered that if you can go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, what would you say? The Parable of the Vagrant answers just that question. So Dan Rockwell gave his first presentation at the age of 16 and has been delivering presentations and workshops ever since. His fascination with leadership led him to launch the ever-popular Leadership Freak blog in January 2010. Today, Leadership Freak is read in virtually every country on the globe. And with nearly 500,000 subscribers, it's the place to go for leadership advice. Joining Dan Rockwell is John David Mann, who's an award-winning author with writings that have earned him the Nautilus Award, the Axiom Business Award, Taiwan's Golden Book Award for Innovation, and the Living Now Book Award Evergreen Medal for contribution to positive global change. He co-authored the worldwide classic The Go-Giver with Bob Burg and 4 New York Times bestsellers. So welcome to the show, Dan Rockwell and John David Mann.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne.
What an honor it is to have you both here to talk about this book. What inspired you both to write this book?
I'd had this idea for a story in my head and in my heart for 10 years or so. The story of a up-and-coming, highly talented, successful young leader who basically doesn't realize that he's doing things that aren't really effective, thinks he's doing great. It's probably the story of all of us in some ways. So I contacted John one day because I tried to write it and then I thought, who is the very best at this that I know? And I knew about John David Mann from The Go-Giver and his other work. And I thought, aim high, Danny boy. So that's what I did. I gave John a call, told him the story, and it's my good fortune that the story captured his imagination as well.
Yeah, I love hearing Dan's side of the story. I'll chip in with my part. Marianne, I get a lot of requests to partner with people, to co-author with people, because most of the books I've done have been co-author partnerships. But when Dan called, it was kind of like Jerry Maguire. He had me at hello. I knew in that first phone call we were absolutely going to do this book. And it's funny because for years I had been thinking there were 2 topics that I would love to write about sometime in a parable. And one of them was forgiveness, which I haven't done yet, so that's still ahead of me. And the other was humility. That really intrigued me. I'd written about it a bunch in the Go-Giver Leader, and the topic fascinates me, both as a writer and also biographically in my own life. Because I think that when I was a young man, I was rife with the arrogance of youth. I knew my opinion better than anybody else's, and I really wasn't correctable. Incorrigible is the literal meaning of that word. And when Dan said, I want to write this parable, and I had this idea, and it's kind of a parable about humility, it's like, oh my goodness, the man is speaking my song. So, so we dove in immediately. And this has been a thrilling process for me from the word go. Every step of the way has been just a delight.
Well, I am just so thrilled with this book, and I can see why it's resonating with so many people, because I think we all have walked that path where we're young and we think we know everything. And then we figure out, well, gosh, I didn't know half as much as I thought I did.
Marianne, I have to say, when we're young, we don't know as much as we think we know. And sometimes when we're old, we know even less than we think we know, which means, we're on the journey of humility. We haven't escaped. We haven't arrived yet. And that's I've been so excited about, the story itself. It continues to fascinate me, and I continue to enjoy it. As John, when we got together, I told John in a nutshell what I was thinking about, and then he added a couple of characters, and he changed. He just brought himself to the process. And today, as I look at it, it's like it speaks to me. And thankfully, I'm getting messages from people who say, I read it. I read the reflection questions at the end, and I realized I'm reading it again. So that's exciting to me.
It's easy to write a parable, but it's also it's easy to write a terrible parable. It's extraordinarily difficult to write a good parable, and I say that with I hope with all humility, because it is a challenging process. It's a simple story. Parables are by their nature simple, like a medieval morality play where the characters are named after qualities like death and joy and happiness. So they're simple stories, but if they're flat, if they're one-dimensional, if they look like just thinly disguised PowerPoints about a certain topic, then they're boring and nobody cares. For a parable to work, the story has got to kind of rip your heart out. It's got to engage you. It's got to feel real. You've got to care about this character. And our guy, Bob, the hero of the story, the challenge of the story is at the beginning, he's not entirely likable. He's certainly trying his best. And at his heart, I think he means well. But he's just made a hash out of his life without having the self-reflection to realize that that's what he's done. And so part of the journey of the Vagrant is finding our way to rooting for Bob and realizing that as we root for Bob, we're kind of rooting for ourselves.
Well, that's pretty powerful. That's a very powerful journey. What would you like to add to the story without giving everything away, Dan?
Well, what would I like to reveal here about the story? Well, if you've ever looked in the mirror and thought you have it figured out, and later realized you didn't, or if someone has ever said something to you that didn't make any sense, you're thinking, that's nuts. Like when I was younger, I had people saying to me, Dan, you can be pushy. There's a thin line between passion and pushy. And I think I'm a fuzzy teddy bear. So when I look in the mirror, I see like Winnie the Pooh. But when I'm across from people, sometimes they see someone who is a little more like a crocagator or something, somebody that's kind of, pushy. And it's those things in the story that really speak to me. So there are several of those experiences that Bob, the main character, has where, someone said something to him and it's like, oh, that's ridiculous. And like so many of us, Bob takes a little while to come to grips with what's happening.
I think I want to add to that, several inspirations, aside from Dan's original idea, several inspirations for the story we put at the front of the book. One is the book of Job from the Old Testament, where, this guy who is by all accounts a virtuous man has every type of calamity heaped on his head. And the journey of Bob is a little bit like the journey of Job in some ways. The second inspiration was that fantastic scene in the Shawshank Redemption where Morgan Freeman is going for his last parole hearing, and he's asked if he's sorry for what he did, and he says, he talks about how he wishes he could talk to the young man who committed that terrible crime, talk sense to him, make him see how things are. He says, but I can't. That young man is long gone, and this old man is all that's left. I don't know a person who hasn't been moved by that scene and wished that in some ways they could go back and talk to their 19 or 20 or 24-year-old self. And that's sort of what Bob has the opportunity to do in the story. And then I think the third inspiration was from Warren Bennis, the modern father of leadership, who says that that becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It's just that simple and just that difficult. So we call it a leadership parable, and it is for leaders, but I think it's really for anyone who has any interest in looking at the mirror and finding ways to become a better version of themselves.
Really become a leader in their own lives.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really where, as Warren says, it's really where it starts. It's where great leadership starts, is with understanding yourself, looking in the mirror.
This point of self-reflection is something that many people don't do. Why do you think this is an important piece, Dan, for people to dive into and start to go into that as your book talks about the inner journey?
Well, first of all, let me say, Marianne, I'm a dairy farm boy from central Maine, and things like self-reflection are completely irrelevant to me, or were, because when you get up in the morning, you don't have anything to reflect on. You know what's going to happen. You're going to milk the cows and you're going to do your job. Well, come to find out, most of us fall into patterns where we don't even notice our lives. We kind of sleepwalk through. So if we want to become ourselves, we need to engage in some intentional activities. And perhaps the most important one is a systematic or structured form of self-reflection. Not simply, it's important to contemplate the meaning of life. And if you put meditation loosely in this bucket, that's fine with me. But self-reflection in the sense of, am I really going where I want to go? And am I really achieving what I want to achieve? And am I being myself? And here's what happens. I coach leaders all over the world. And when I ask them to tell me about their self-reflection practice, they look at me like a cow looks at a new gate. And I had to tell you, I was a dairy farm boy originally before I said that line. But it's just not a common thing. And to me, today, I realize that it's essential. If leadership is about becoming who you are yourself, then wow, this practice, regular systematic practice of self-reflection is an essential step on that journey.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dan Rockwell and John David Mann in regards to their new book, The Vagrant. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Jana Wilson, author of Wise Little One, Learning to Love and Listen to My Inner Child, a best-selling prescriptive memoir in inner child healing. I'm also the founder of the Emotional Healing System. The inner child, simply put, is your feelings, both positive and negative. If you'd like to learn to love and listen to your wise little one, pick up my book at Amazon or visit my website at janawilson.com. It's never too late to have a happy childhood.
The first thing you need to know about me is that I love my kids, but they are not my everything. They used to be, but that's when my entire life fell apart. In order to pick back up the pieces, I had to put the love I have for myself before everything else, including my kids. I'm Jessica Dennehy, and I own multiple businesses. I'm a best-selling author, and I have all the strategies that I've used to make my life what it is today. And I'm going to teach you how to do them in my new book, Selfish is a Superpower. So go get your copy today on Barnes & Noble or jessicadennehy.com.
Announcing a revolutionary tool for wellness. Scalar Light has the ability to enhance and harmonize your own bioenergies. With Scalar Light, you can get started in just minutes and begin feeling better the very next day. Scalar Light is a remote energy that gently and subtly works with your own body's bioenergies, increases pro-cellular wellness, and enhances your body's immunity.
Experience the benefits of Scalar Light. Try a complimentary 15-day experience at scalarlight.com.
Are you ready to celebrate World Wellness Weekend on September 15, 16, and 17? Well, we are. 6,000 venues in 147 countries are organizing fun and free activities for you to enjoy with your friends, your family, your colleagues. Look on wellmap.org, WELLMAP.
In your hands lie ancestral patterns. These patterns shape how you think, what you struggle with, and experiences you love, your life pattern. we're going into the latest neuroscience of biological hand analysis, a realm beyond palmistry where science and the soul entwine. Hand analysis is the latest method to transform lifelong patterns. I am Master Hand Analyst Brent Bruning. Join us and visit thepowerinyourhands.com.
Looking for a page turner? Cozy up to a fantasy adventure romance trilogy with The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper by Mary Kay Savarese. The second novel in the Star Writers trilogy, The Star Writers Club, is coming soon. Take the journey. Connect with Mary at www.maryksavarese.com. Her books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores.
With Breath Hub, you'll experience the transformative power of breath as it harmonizes your body, mind, and spirit. Recommended by experts in fitness, sports, psychology, and medicine. Meet the scientific way of being well. Breath Hub. Breathe better, live better.
Pandemonium. Fast forward 20 years. A U.S. president seizes control of all U.S. missiles, the power grid, the banking system, and every computer in America as he hides in an underground bunker. Pandemonium, a captivating sci-fi thriller where a hidden war, psychics, aliens, artificial intelligence, and transcendental love collide with the latest media technology. Pandemonium, live to all devices. Get your copy on paperback or digital. Free sample at getpsychic.org.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our two very special guests, Dan Rockwell and John David Mann, and they're here to share with us their new book, The Vagrant, The Inner Journey of Leadership, a Parable. So before we left for break, we were talking about the importance of self-reflection. What are your thoughts on that, John?
What Dan and I first started talking, because I didn't really know Dan before we engaged in this book process. I knew of him, and we were acquaintances through email, and he's been a huge supporter of the Go-Giver books for many years. So I admired him and respected him, but we actually got to know each other and shooting emails back and forth and talking on the phone. And he said something early on that really caught my attention. He said that self-reflection is the best self-reflection, or I'm paraphrasing, but because he says it better, the best self-reflection is not practiced in isolation. It's not a solitary process. Self-reflection, the way Dan teaches it, is not something you do sitting by yourself, staring at your navel in a room. It's something that you do as a conversation with the people around you, because they are your mirrors. I'm fond of saying nobody in the world knows you better than you know yourself, except for everyone else. I mean, the people who around you, your spouse, your partners, your friends, your siblings, your parents, your kids, so many people around you see aspects of you that you may not necessarily see, or they see them more clearly in some ways, certainly more objectively in some ways than you do. So, for self-reflection to have value, to have teeth, to really move you in some direction, the resource that you need is the resource that's already around you, which is other people.
Marianne, let me give you an illustration of that. Thanks for bringing that up, John. The self-reflection done in isolation leads to self-deception. And Daniel Kahneman wrote this book some years ago, and it's filled with all the ways that we can deceive ourselves. It really rocked my world. So I'll give you an illustration of how we might engage others. suppose you're the kind of person you want to lead energizing meetings. Now that's a lofty aspiration because most of us hate meetings, and most meetings, or often meetings, kind of suck the life out of us. And you think you're doing it right because, let's face it, you didn't set out to do it wrong. When you started that meeting, you set out to make it you wanted people to leave more energized than when they walked in. But you unconsciously or unaware of your behavior, you do things that actually do drain energy. And that's where you just go to a couple of your colleagues who you trust and tell them your intention. I intend to lead a meeting that energizes the participants. Would you mind watching my behavior and the things that I do in the meeting and notice when I'm doing things that increase energy and when I do things that drain energy? And then just get with them for a short conversation after the meeting and ask them what they noticed. Now you have something to work with, because they may say, and often people do, they may say something surprising, something you didn't intend. So now you get to take that back and say, okay, let's see, am I aligning with this? Does this make sense? Because you don't want to let other people run your life. And then as you reflect on it, you think, all right, what would be some way that would align fully with the kind of person I want to be and also achieve the intention that I've set for these meetings?
Well, I think that's pretty interesting, especially when we look at perception. A lot of times we will think that we are doing things in a certain way and people perceive us completely different.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's part of what Bob's journey is all about. It's almost impossible. Maybe it is impossible to see yourself clearly in that way, because it's kind of like pulling yourself up by your own feet. You depend on other people for that. It's essential. And yet it's the very thing that, as we were all saying at the start of this phone call, is the very thing that a lot of us resist when we're young. Partly because we're, full of thrill and vinegar and excitement about the life ahead of us, and we need to assert ourselves and, stake our claim and so on and so forth. So it's kind of natural to be self-assertive when you're starting out in life. But it's easy to kind of walk over the most important messages and clues in the process.
You're noticing, Marianne, something that I think is important here, and that is, again, those surprising things that people say to us. It can be very disappointing. It can be surprising. It can be frustrating. And instead of really reflecting on those things, we perhaps like to push them away and just say, well, no, you don't see things accurately. I suppose one of the things we ought to understand is that people's perceptions are their perceptions. And it's like, I don't get to say, you have the wrong perception. You do have a perception. And like John said earlier, often people's perceptions of us are a little more clear than the perceptions we have of ourselves. What do they say? We judge ourselves by our intentions, and other people judge us by our actions.
There's a scene in the book where Bob is starting to feel uneasy about, starting to get this sense that maybe his reputation isn't as sterling as he thought that it was in his community, his business community. And he seeks out a young guy named Gavin, who's kind of a nerdy guy and doesn't really play political games and is kind of outside the political mainstream of the company. And he goes to him because he figures he's gonna straight shoot. And so he says, "So how is my reputation? What is it like?" And basically, Gavin says, when you walk into a room, you kind of suck all the oxygen out. You fill the room. You're Mr. Volume. He starts out by saying, "You're loud." And Bob says, "I'm loud? What do you mean? I'm not loud." And he's thinking of these guys that you see at the airport who are yelling into their mobile phones about some important business thing while everybody else at the boarding gate is looking at them with rolled eyes saying, "Can't that guy talk softer?" He's like, "I'm not loud." And Gavin says, when you walk into a room, nobody else has a chance. You take up all that space. Completely off Bob's radar. He doesn't have the faintest idea that he has that effect on people. But it's as we can tell from Gavin, it's painfully obvious to everybody else in the room. And that's often the case. It's like we have a sign on, the top of our head that we can't see saying, I am this way or I am that way. And we don't notice it because we're just being us.
Isn't that the truth? And it's interesting how we walk through the world and being able to have that level of self-awareness where we're getting feedback from other people, being able to accept it, and then using that as a life skill, I think is such an important thing. And one of the things I really kind of took away from this book.
And I want to jump in and say, and just add a point, which is that, people also have perceptions of us that are incredibly positive. People often see things in us that are powerfully good and strong that we don't see. It's the same syndrome, but turned on its head. My wife and I often, we'll go out to eat or something, and the waitress comes up, and my wife will turn to her and say, that your hair is absolutely gorgeous, or your eyes are just luminous. You're so beautiful. You don't even know how beautiful you are. And I'm always thinking, my wife can say that. I could never say that. It's not cool for a guy to say that, but she does that every opportunity to let these young women know how gorgeous they are, because she says they don't realize it when they're young. And even when we're not young, we often don't realize the full extent of the good impact that we have on people, as well as some of the more negative traits. There's a moment late in the book when Bob has talked about how he was raised to think that he was special, and he always saw himself as kind of being special. I'm not giving spoilers away, I promise. And at one point, when he's gone through a pretty serious beating in life, one of his friends, his few friends, is with him, and he says, "I always thought I was special, but I'm nothing special at all." And she says to him, "Bob, you are special. The thing is, so is everyone." And that's also the thing that Bob wasn't seeing is the specialness in other people. But I just wanted to make sure that I put in there that other people's impressions of us and perspectives on us are not always bad. They can also be great. And those are also good pieces of feedback to get.
Thanks for turning toward that, John, because it's so true. We've all had conversations that once surprised us because we thought they were completely wrong.
Yeah.
But we've also had conversations with people, or people have said things to us that just filled us with confidence and shifted the way we thought about ourselves and propelled us along in the journey because they saw something in us that we didn't see. Such a powerful moment.
So I have to ask, Dan, when we look at leadership, and I know we've talked a lot about, self-awareness and self-reflection. When we talk about leadership, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think the first thing, Warren Bennett's definition is fantastic, but I feel a little bit like a gerbil on an exercise wheel when I hear it. Becoming yourself, being you. And Frances Hesselbein, who was the CEO of the Girl Scouts, told me when she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, she had to go to the White House and she was going to give a talk, and she felt like she had to say something smart. So she gave her definition of leadership. And she said, leadership is a matter of how to be, how to do, not how to do. And it's like, that freaks me out. So there is obviously a doing part of leadership there. And when I started writing Leadership Freak 15 years ago, I was all about do these 5 things to run great meetings, do these 4 things to have great one-on-ones. And I still do a lot of that because that is part of leadership. But there is the richness of life happens when we bring our real self to work. So often leaders lose themselves to doing. And this is where we can interject the idea of some quietness, some self-reflection, some seeking of feedback. And then we continue to get back in touch with ourselves. I don't know about you. I get lost in what I'm doing, and that's a very good thing. But on the other hand, sometimes leaders get lost in work so much that they lose themselves and they end up drained, exhausted, frustrated, and kind of wondering what in the world they're doing.
That brings me to a really good point. I know that people come to you both, in regards to leadership and when we talk about leadership values. What would you say to someone that just feels like, gosh, I'm at the end of my rope and they're a leader? What would you say to them?
I want to sort of say, well, let go, because you're probably hanging on to a lot of things and you've lost where your energy comes from. One of the wonderful things that I've learned to do with leaders, and that sounded kind of arrogant, didn't it? I've learned to do something wonderful with leaders. Sorry about that, but is to monitor their energy. Just notice when their energy goes up. So it's important to know when you're being drained and your energy is going down. But on the journey, noticing when energy goes up helps us reconnect with our values, helps us reconnect with what matters. When our energy persistently spirals downward, we're obviously moving away from that authentic self. You can't be everything to everyone. If you can be true to yourself, then you'll find energy to bring your greatest contribution to the world.
That's fabulous. I love listening to Dan talk about leadership. Marianne, the paradigm of leadership that I grew up with was my father, and my dad was a choral conductor and a musicologist. But I grew up under him literally. I played in his orchestras. I studied conducting with him, and I would be sitting in the orchestra pit with a choir of 150 and an orchestra of 80 or 90. And my father has an extremely soft voice. It's difficult to hear him across a small room, let alone in an auditorium. There's no microphones here. It's just him on the podium. And he would mold these 200, 250 people like they were putty. And it wasn't manipulative. It was every one of them would hang on his every word. Every one of them could hear everything he said. Because why? A few things. One was his unswerving passion and commitment to the quality of the music. He was in love with Bach and Handel and all the music that he brought to life. He grew up in that tradition in Germany. And the second was his knowledge. He understood this stuff. He knew what he was talking about. They knew that every word he spoke, they could learn from. And I think those are two of the qualities of a valuable leader, is having not only a passion for what it is we're all doing, this team of ours, but a visible passion. It being such a model of passion and commitment to all the others that like you want to emulate that. And two, knowing what you're talking about, knowing the topic, knowing the nuts and bolts of what the team does, whether it's building cars or managing, a nonprofit or running a university or whatever it's doing. Understanding what it means down in the trenches. I think that's a powerful trait of a solid leader.
Thank you for sharing that. I had never heard that story before, and how fascinating is that? Well, my goodness, I love the book, The Vagrant. I felt it was such a powerful read. Dan and John, where can our listeners connect with you both and be part of the community that you have and learn more about this book?
Well, if you go to Google and type in leadership freak, so far I'm the only one, so you'll find me there. You can also email Dan at leadershipfreak.com.
And for me, my website is just my name, John David Mann with 2 N's, johndavidmann.com. All my books are there. You can see there's a Vagrant is right on the front page of my site right now. And if you click on that, you go to a page for this book. And on that page, you'll find all the podcasts Dan and I are doing and information about the book and some excerpts from the book. And you can also order the book. And it's available, as they say, wherever books are sold. Go to bookshop.org to find an independent bookstore near you that will get it for you if you don't see it, obviously, around. And yeah, it's available everywhere.
Well, John and Dan, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Marianne.
Same here, Marianne. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan Rockwell and John David Mann. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Vagrant. The Vagrant's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. Just make sure to purchase it from them. You can also purchase this book directly from the publisher, Ben Bella Books, at benbellabooks.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.